A massive request I've gotten in the last year and a half or so was a complete retrospective on the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series from Nickelodeon. This was because I devoted a large chunk of time to covering the 2003 TMNT cartoon in an 8-part retrospective. The response to that retrospective was so astonishingly positive, beyond my expectations anyway, that I knew I'd one day talk about this franchise again, and since this was the thing people wanted to see the most, let's get to it. If you watched part 1 of my 2003 retrospective, you'd have seen my rundown of the history of the TMNT that led to the 2003 series. Plus, if you're a fan, you'd probably know all of that anyway, so I won't repeat it. I'll instead give the bullet points to get us to the 2012 show. The Turtles debuted in the mid-1980s as an edgy comic spoofing contemporary comics. The creators felt like there was a real opportunity to turn it into a more significant franchise as the book grew in popularity. They tried getting action figures, but the toy company wanted a cartoon series first, and thus the 1987 TMNT cartoon was born, which really created the multimedia icon status the brand knows to this day. The show ran for 10 seasons, and its popularity was felt all over the globe as it spawned live-action movies and a truckload of merchandise. Though by the mid-90s there were some diminishing returns as the live-action sequels failed to live up to the standards of the first one, both critically and commercially, and the cartoon pivoted towards a darker tone when that was the in thing at the time. There was a bit of an implosion when they did the Next Mutation live-action series in 1997 that only ran for 1 season, and then the brand was not seen again for 5 years. The 2003 series was meant to be a full-scale reboot of the franchise, leaving the past behind and forging something new for a modern audience by taking the storyline of the original comics and trying to improve upon it while still maintaining the all-ages appeal. For a while, it was quite successful. The Turtles were back at the top for the early years of the new show's run. However, things got messy when its 4th season also pivoted towards a really dark direction that gave the network it was on cold feet as the 5th season was halted from airing and the show instead pivoted towards a brighter and sillier direction for its 6th and 7th seasons. Meanwhile, the network, 4Kids, was also not doing well and was approaching its demise in the late 2000s. The final note of the 2003 series was the film Turtles Forever, which was meant to celebrate the brand's 25th anniversary by bringing the original 87 Turtles back in a crossover with the 2000s Turtles. How you feel about the execution is a matter of opinion. But either way, that was the series finale. Similar to the time prior to the 2003 series, the time after this show was when the franchise took a bit of a break, but this time with a major shift in the status quo. For 25 years, the TMNT were owned by Mirage and had involvement from the creators, but in late 2009 it was announced that Viacom had purchased the global rights to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for $60 million, and they would begin conceptualizing a brand new CG animated series for Nickelodeon that would premiere in 2012. Now, as for me, I found all this pretty exciting. By this point, I had learned that I could use the internet to hear all the latest news and my favorite topics by typing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the Google News search bar, and that's how I found out that the 2000 series was ending and something new was starting. I guess it was sad that the version of the TMNT I accepted as the default would end, but I was still pretty excited to see something new come out. Especially once we started getting the teasers and cast announcements in 2012 and 2011. I was pretty excited, especially once 2012 hit and I found out that people on YouTube had uploaded the entire 2003 series and I was able to go back and properly watch the whole thing. This is how I became enough of a super fan of it to build the knowledge base I shared in my 2003 retrospective. 2012 was, as I have said, also the year the new show was going to come out, and I was pretty hyped for its release. However, the funny thing is, the reason it took me this long to review the 2012 show was because I've never watched it before. Makes no sense, right? Well, let me explain. I consumed every bit of news I could find related to the 2012 series before it came out and counted down the days for it to drop, only to not watch the show and never get around to it for 11 years. I mean, what happened? Well, I did watch the first few episodes as they aired when I was 11 going on 12, however I decided to stop watching the series a few weeks in because of 4 words. Different and therefore ruined. The 2003 Turtles and the 2007 movie were the things that shaped my understanding of the TMNT as a brand. So while I was excited to see a new version of the Turtles, subconsciously I had realized it had to exist within this strict boundary or I wasn't going to be interested in it. But that was never what the 2012 show was going to be. The attitude of the creatives behind this series was completely different from the one I had grown up with. Remember, the 2003 series was created in a time where the franchise was at an all-time low. The nostalgia wasn't really what they were going for. The comics were the significant influence, and most references to the classic series were tongue-in-cheek.
Mikey, I told you, no more cowabunga!
Now, 10 years later, things were very different. The people who made the 2012 show were the generation of artists who grew up influenced by things like the 1987 Turtles. So this show was, as they said from the offset, a modernization of that classic series with influences from the comics and other versions, which is almost the exact opposite of what the 2003 series was. In fact, for the pre-release material for the 2012 series, it was such a celebration of the nostalgia from the old show and a discussion about how they were modernizing it that it almost felt like the 2003 series didn't even exist anymore. Part of why I felt like doing such an in-depth retrospective on it, if you recall. But yeah, the opening theme of the 2012 series is a new take on the classic theme, the comedy value is a large priority, and several episodes revolve around mutagen and mutations like the classic show. So I realized early on this wasn't a repeat of the 2003 series. I decided I didn't like it and gave up after about 9 or 10 episodes. So basically, I've never seen it. Admittedly, this made me really nervous about the idea of doing this video series because people have high expectations for it, but I wasn't sure if I could ever deliver since the 2003 retrospective was a product of more than a decade of watching, rewatching, researching, and thinking about that series. For example, I couldn't compile a funny list of inconsistencies or animation goofs in this show because I haven't watched it to the extent where I could. I couldn't establish points in this video that will pay off in 3 videos' time like the previous retrospective because I haven't seen what comes later in the series, so therefore I can only say what I know. I didn't want to let anyone down with these 2012 videos, since I knew it couldn't be the same as what I had done before since I had never seen this show before and wouldn't want to force it to be the same either. TMNT is one of the few fandoms where I would say I'm a known figure where I haven't pissed anybody off, and I really didn't want to change that. But I decided I was going to give this a chance and just tell the world what I thought of this show now that I'm not 12 years old anymore and can give it an honest try and research it to the best of my ability. Luckily, my doubts were put to rest when I was watching episodes 1 and 2, Rise of the Turtles. This episode introduced the new series pretty effectively. As is true for many animated shows, they put their best foot forward in terms of the animation for this one and demonstrated the varying skill levels between the different turtles and their personalities in one quick scene. The setup is that today is the 15th anniversary of Splinter and the Turtles being mutated by a mysterious ooze, prompting Splinter to retell the story of how it happened, which is a really natural way to quickly establish the backstory in this universe, while also making some elements of it mysterious, as this backstory is a small part of a larger conspiracy in this version. The reward for the Turtles turning 15 is that they're allowed to go to the surface world for the first time and discover what it has to offer. On the way, they find a father and daughter, Kirby and April O'Neil, being kidnapped by mysterious men in suits who are also carrying the mutagen that created them. In part 2, the Turtles try to rescue this family but only succeed in rescuing April, and what they discover is that this is an alien conspiracy by a race called the Krang who have some kind of world domination plot, and now that the Turtles are friends with April, they're going to work together to find out what the Krang are up to and stop it and save April's dad. But their antics fighting the Krang have alerted the Shredder to the fact that Splinter is teaching new students in New York and sets out to find them and finish what he started 15 years ago. As I said, I felt like this was a really well done series of pilot episodes, introducing us to almost every major character for the season, and establishing that there will be some classic TMNT elements here and accounted for, but many with new twists to keep it feeling fresh and lots of mysteries that later episodes will develop. The story and status quo continue to be built up throughout the following few episodes, making this the perfect time to talk about the main cast throughout the series and what makes them stand out in the 2012 incarnation. Even though I am eternally biased in favor of the 2000s Turtles, I grew to like these guys over the 26 episodes of Season 1. This is partially thanks to the actors who brought the characters to life. Leonardo is voiced by Jason Biggs, best known for his role in American Pie, which has, nothing to do with this show, but still, there'll be plenty of time to talk about him in a later part of this retrospective. Sean Astin plays Raphael, and he's been in a lot of movies, but the most interesting thing about him for me is that I actually know somebody who met him once. Not like at a con or anything, but in regular life. Thought that was a neat tidbit of info. Rob Paulson plays Donatello, and what was super interesting about that was that he had played Raphael for 9 of the 10 seasons of the '87 Turtles. The amount of voice work he had done made him someone that the producers really wanted to audition for Donatello, knowing full well how much turtle experience he already had. And he was very enthusiastic about coming back and doing a new take on it.
But I just wanted to make sure that they knew that I had been down that road before, and they weren't going to go say, oh, that's right, he was Raphael, let's just throw the old guy a bone. And their response was, no, we know exactly who you are. We like Pinky, and we like Yakko, and we love Raphael, and we love Carl from Jimmy Neutron, all this other stuff. We just think you'd be really ideal for our vision of Donatello. So, dude, I was happy to go read and astonished after 3 or 4 callbacks that they said, okay, guess what? You're getting another crack at this whole turtle thing. So I am out of my mind with excitement. It's great.
Lastly, Michelangelo was voiced by Greg Sipes, who's also pretty big in the voiceover world thanks to Teen Titans and the Ben 10 franchise. And he was also really passionate about Ninja Turtles and wanted to do the project. Together, they have a lot of chemistry, and the voices fit the characters really well.
Raph's been bitten by a giant poisonous robotic fish!
That's not possible.
If he was bitten, it's venom, not poison.
I chalk that up to the fact that the legendary Andrea Romano was the voice director for this series. Anyone who's ever worked with her as a casting or voice director has had nothing but glowing things to say about how she relates to and works with actors.
Well, there's a lot of fight cues in the Turtles episodes, and so that when you're doing that for like a good half hour, straight, it can be a little taxing, so you gotta make sure we take ourselves a little bit of a break there. But fortunately, Andrea Romano, who's our director, is very conscious of that. So she tries to pull back on that as much as possible and try to get the fight attacks on the first take, so you don't have to constantly repeat it over and over again.
In voiceover, she's big on recording in an ensemble as it draws the best performances out of the actors, and in work she's involved in, that chemistry is palpable on the screen.
One of the things that they really wanted at the beginning of the season was to try to build chemistry, and so we were all together as much as possible, and I think that really, really helped. And now that we have a little bit more under our belt, we can kind of take that feeling with us as we go, but still we try to get together as much as we can.
But these Turtles being enjoyable to watch is also thanks to the writing. The T in TMNT always stood for teenage, but that usually meant very little in how the characters interacted. Mikey might have been more childish than the rest, but the others kept up with April and Casey like they were already adults. This version really focused on making the Turtles all feel like teens. Leo's drive to be a leader is based on his love of this Star Trek-style cartoon series that often foreshadows the plot of the episode. Raph is the angry one as usual, but I think this version spent the most amount of time on his sensitive side, giving him a non-mutated pet turtle to interact with. Donnie has this crush on April that is the most cringe thing to watch, but I mean that in the best possible way because they wrote it to make it feel like he's an actual dorky teen, played up to the 10th degree, like how he actually draws up a flowchart of everything she might say and what his response should be, and has planned every outcome. Though on that note, the most significant change to a core cast member in this version was April. And that's saying a lot because I don't think there have ever been two incarnations of April that have been identical. Her profession changes, her personality changes, and her ethnicity changes, which somehow only became a problem for freaky internet nerds recently. But back on target, this version of April was turned into a 15-year-old when she was normally double the Turtles' age. Making April a peer of the team changes the dynamic because it first allows them to tell stories they haven't before, like fighting inside of a school, and it created the opportunity for this crush plotline that further allowed the writers to show the Turtles' routines too. Generally, I just found this April to be an endearing character even after only one season.
Miss me? Yeah, actually. Last time I saw you, I forgot to give you this!
Making April another young acolyte of Splinter also serves a narrative purpose, as it gives him flashbacks of his actual daughter from his pre-mutated life. And what a segue that was. I've only seen one full season, and I think this might be my favorite version of Splinter of the ones I've seen. Portraying Master Splinter as the father of the Turtles over him just being their teacher is the norm, and already was by 2012, but I just like this version because they made the overprotective father scenes funny. I think it helps that Splinter, played by Hoon Lee, sounds real. Don't get me wrong, I love the 2003 Splinter, but the voice always sounded really overdone. This Splinter just sounds more natural and has more range in his performance, which made this version of the character more compelling. But I can get into more reasons why later. Splinter's backstory in this one is similar to the 1987 cartoon where Splinter used to be a ninjutsu master named Hamato Yoshi that got mutated into a rat alongside the Turtles. Despite my favorite TMNT incarnations using Splinter's backstory from the comics, I will say his being a human that got turned into a mutant rat was always something I felt was slightly more believable than his being a pet rat turned mutant that happened to observe a ninja master. Obviously, it's Ninja Turtles, so I can't say I'm here for realism, I'm just saying this backstory was one that I thought made Splinter a more believable ninja master. For whatever that's worth. Well, that's just about it for the core cast of good guys in Season 1. As I said, I was pretty impressed. I thought the main characters had a really good dynamic and the season made good use of those dynamics in its 26-episode run. But with well-done main characters, naturally that brings us into talking about the world around them. Before discussing any other character, I wanted to talk about the art design. Being a 3D animated series from over 10 years ago, I wasn't expecting my socks to be blown off, but for what it was worth, I thought the action scenes looked pretty good and kept the pace of the episodes up. The series just having a very comic book feeling to its world design, which I thought complemented the kind of basic buildings and such you'd see from a CG show from over a decade ago. Sometimes I feel like the visuals are a bit undersaturated, but that's pretty par for the course. The artists doing that thing that Teen Titans also did where they'd play around with the expressions to emphasize whatever characters are feeling, and I thought that was put to pretty good use. I also really like how the Turtles have pupils you can see, which further helps them emote, but in more important battle scenes, the characters have the all-white eyes from the comics of the 2003 series, so you get the best of both worlds on that front. In terms of design, I think these versions are some of my favorite Turtles ever drawn. Ever since the group's debut, each version has been distinguishing them more and more, as the comics made them all look exactly the same, the first cartoon created the multicolored headbands, and the 2003 series gave each turtle their own shade of green in their skin. But in each of these cases, the bodies were more or less exactly the same. I'd imagine in traditional animation, 4 characters who looked the same was probably easier to animate and keep things on model as much as possible, even though the 80s series struggled with that a lot anyway. Now that they are in 3D, each turtle can just get their own model, and they decided to play around with the designs, making them all different heights, giving them different head shapes, eye colors, facial details, and body types. Donatello is the tallest and skinniest, for example. Raphael is the bulkiest, and Michelangelo is the shortest and has freckles. In the incarnations that have followed this one, I have felt that the designs were a little too distinguished, to the point where I feel like the Ninja Turtles have become somewhat over-designed. Like, we get it, Don is smart. He doesn't need to wear glasses and have a bunch of tech on him at all times. Simply making him the tallest and skinniest and giving him the gap in his teeth really gets the job done. He's weaker physically, but then we see he's the smartest via personality. But my point is, these are my favorite designs of the Turtles that I've ever seen. This version of the Turtles really sets itself apart with the villains, though. The first major threat is the Krang, the alien race from Dimension X. I thought this was a cool new way to fuse together old concepts. Krang was a villain from Dimension X that worked with Shredder in the 87 series, loosely based on the idea of the Utroms from the comics, tiny aliens that lived in the stomachs of human robots. The Krang fused these two ideas together by making them a whole alien species that are out to rule the Earth and operate in the TCRI building. Having a whole bunch of them makes them easy cannon fodder for the Turtles in the action scenes, but from a story perspective, I liked how they tried to do something new with old concepts rather than just redoing what's been done or trying to reinvent the wheel. I also liked the gimmick with the Krang, where Nolan North voiced all of them as they talk in this really bizarre fashion.
This is going to leave that which is known as a mark. Affirmative.
Shredder is, of course, the main antagonist of the series, expertly played by Kevin Michael Richardson. I like how in the first season, Shredder only fights the Turtles twice, but he remains a threatening figure throughout all the episodes because he's responsible for all the plots, and the Turtles can barely beat his right-hand men, and they really get brought down to reality when he kicked their asses 9 episodes in when they were starting to get overconfident. Shredder begins an alliance with the Krang when he realizes that they're both fighting the Turtles and that the Krang's mutagen was responsible for turning 2 of his best guys into mutant freaks, Dog Pound and Fish Face. Which is another example of the show doing things that are familiar but new. Shredder having mutant henchmen is obviously a callback to the 87 series, but instead of just bringing back Bebop and Rocksteady, they created new characters with new personalities that have different dynamics with each of the Turtles than previously seen characters. And yes, I do know that Bebop and Rocksteady do appear in this series, but I'm just saying that at the start they opted to do something new. But that's not to say there aren't plenty of TMNT staples here unaccounted for. In fact, many of them are here in the first season. Just 5 episodes in, they introduce Baxter Stockman, who is, as usual, responsible for the Mouser robots. Now, I don't think any version of Stockman could ever compare to the 2003 version, see the previous retrospective for more information, but having said that, I liked this take. Phil Lamar plays him, and while he's a genius here, he's less competent than his 2003 incarnation and more of a joke character. I found the jokes at his expense, like nobody remembering his name, landed pretty well. In episode 12, they introduced Leatherhead as a product of the Krang's mutation that's trying to stop the coming invasion and becomes an ally of the Turtles, while dealing with his usual anger problems that he takes out by grabbing Donatello's face, which I thought was funny as well. Then you meet the man who becomes the Rat King in episode 7, and then he fully transforms in episode 13, I, Monster, which calls back to the same movie the Rat King's debut episode in the 2003 series did, fun fact. The Rat King in this was played by Jeffrey Combs, who fans of my channel at least may recognize because he voiced the Question on Justice League Unlimited and the Scarecrow in the new Batman adventures. That parallel was made in my mind since the design of the Rat King in this series kinda reminded me of the Scarecrow from TNBA. But anyway, the season really wastes no time as Shredder's daughter, Karai, is introduced in just 14 episodes. She has a back and forth with Leonardo as you'd come to expect from other incarnations, but this became the most compelling ongoing plotline of the season for me. The reason is that Splinter used to be Hamato Yoshi, like I said. Similar to other versions of Hamato Yoshi, he was with a woman named Tang Shen, and they had a daughter named Miwa. Oroku Saki, Shredder, was Yoshi's friend until his jealousy led to the deaths of Tang Shen and Miwa and started their bitter rivalry. This is fusing together a lot of the Splinter backstories into one, and I think it was for the best, as it makes the Splinter v Shredder dynamic more personal than it usually is, while also having Oroku Saki fulfill Mashimi's role in previous incarnations. Later on, it's revealed that Shredder had kidnapped Miwa and raised her himself with the idea that Hamato Yoshi is the reason her mother is dead. Miwa is Karai. And having not seen any of the rest of the show, I'm very interested in seeing where they're going with this plotline in particular because it's pretty unfamiliar territory as a TMNT fan. It was revealed to Splinter in the last episode of the season, and these are my favorite scenes. Splinter didn't really get much in the way of fight scenes this season, but you could tell how powerful he was in what brief glimpses we did get. And so when he goes to Shredder's lair to save April while the Turtles are fighting the Krang to stop the Technodrome, you get to see how actually powerful Splinter is, and it was pretty cool, I must say. It was a really good season finale too, as it provided a satisfactory conclusion to all the things the previous episodes built up while leaving plenty of room for more. Although I did notice one tiny inconsistency where the Turtles raid TCRI and try to destroy the Krang portal. They seemed shocked that it has a shield surrounding it, which led to a funny moment.
Why didn't you tell me?
Well, because I wanted us to fail.
Obviously I didn't know!
But I noticed that that was the whole point of the climax in episode 17, TCRI, where they first go there and see the portal has an impenetrable shield. Actually, while editing this, I realized I was completely wrong about this, and that is not what happens in episode 17. Not sure why I thought it was, because when the shield was revealed in episode 25, I thought this is a contradiction of episode 17. Somehow I already knew the portal had a shield around it, but I got the plot mixed up. But I figured I'd leave this point in anyway because I thought that clip I just played was a genuinely funny moment. But other than that, I thought this was a really good last episode with some of my favorite moments all season, and it made me interested to watch season 2 as the Krang are still out there, Shredder's still going to hunt Splinter and the Turtles, and then there's still the matter of Karai learning the truth. And that is certainly a compliment for a show I've never seen before and was never really interested in watching before deciding to make these videos. The show was high quality enough to where it had won me over by the end. I thought it was an endearing season of television, a fun adventure for all ages that is equal parts fresh and familiar for longtime fans of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it got all the accolades you'd expect. Like the prior two TMNT cartoons, it really kickstarted a new era of Turtle Mania, each episode in the first season netting over 2 million viewers per episode in the US alone, and the merchandise flew off the shelves in the holiday season of 2012 going into 2013. The series being renewed for Season 2 on October 2nd of 2012, just a few days after the series premiere on September 28th. Viacom had gotten quite the bargain when they acquired the rights to the TMNT for just $60 million because it was quickly paying for itself, as the show is just one fraction of the revenue streams for the TMNT. The real prize is in the never-ending amount of merchandise. One of the things that made TMNT so huge to begin with, and the reason it became the massive cartoon it did back in the 80s, was because of Playmates toys. The merchandising for that show pretty much revolutionized the whole toy cartoon industry. Playmates was the company that continued manufacturing TMNT stuff throughout each generation, which I went into in the 2003 retrospective. And they still have the Turtles licensed to this day. But I just wanted to highlight the 2012 era because of the first wave of them dropped a few months before the show, and as an 11-year-old fan, I was all over this. These were the last action figures I got invested in before I just lost interest in action figures altogether. But these were some high quality ones from my recollection, lots of articulation and accessories and all that good shit. All the ones I did have currently sit in a box in the basement of my old house. I have a lot of nostalgia for these. I thought they were dope AF back in the day and always enjoyed watching YouTube videos from Pixel Dan and other toy channels about the ones I both did and didn't have yet. But what was less stellar was on the video game side of things. Konami had done all the games for the TMNT during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, however the rights were given to Ubisoft for a few years until Activision was given the publishing rights for the TMNT games in 2012. There are a lot of mobile games based on the 2012 show, but sticking only to console games, there was first this game called TMNT Out of the Shadows on PS3 and 360. This game was digital only, so it became delisted once Activision didn't renew its license. However, I've had this game installed on my PS3 since like 2014, so I decided to quickly revisit it since I remember enjoying it as a basic Arkham clone. But this game got some pretty poor reception, and I can see why. It looks and runs like trash, and doesn't have very fun combat mechanics and also really low production values. Also, it's only inspired by the art direction and concepts from the show. It's not trying to be a part of that universe, I don't think. As for games that were, the first game based on the 2012 show proper was even worse. I mean, to be fair, I played it for the first time for this video for about 7 minutes, specifically for this segment, but that was certainly more than enough. It's just a cheap tie-in game to a popular kids show and nothing more. Shovelware production values and repetitive combat, nothing worth looking at for longer than a few seconds. And then the third game, Danger of the Ooze, was a side-scroller that had fully animated cutscenes, which surprised me given the bar set by the previous games. But I did love that the title screen was an homage to one of the most famous TMNT comic covers. The intro of the show homages the original comic cover at the end, now that I mention it. But overall, I thought the 2003 series games were mediocre, but I'd play those any day before wanting to play these cheap nothing games. But still, my point is that this show from very early on was quite popular, and like TMNT tradition, the powers behind it wasted no time in capitalizing on that revenue as much as humanly possible, regardless of how good or bad some of that shit actually was. But with figures and games flying off the shelves, and with the show being so popular, the stage was set for its second season, which began airing on October 12th of 2013 with Episode 1, The Mutation Situation. At the end of the first season, the Krang invasion with the Technodrome was halted by the Turtles in April while Splinter learned that Shredder's daughter, Karai, was actually his own daughter, whom he presumed perished. The Krang and Shredder are both still out there, so at the start of Season 2 they're working together as the Krang are meant to deliver the Foot a shipment of mutagens so the Shredder can increase his mutant army ranks. The Turtles try and stop it, but in their reckless overconfidence, they cause the whole shipment of mutagen to fall into the city, which begins a citywide mutation issue, including transforming April's dad, who was only recently rescued from the Krang, into a mutant bat creature. When April finds out the Turtles basically caused this, she doesn't want to talk to them anymore, which sets the scene for Season 2. The Turtles deal with the outbreak of mutations and the fact that April doesn't want to be friends anymore and the ongoing drama with the Foot. I was glad they just decided to dive into the story of the season because there are a lot of interesting plot lines in this season, so it makes sense to progress the story as much as possible in the first episode. Although the fact that I was interested in the main plot lines of Season 2 contributed to one of the nitpicks I had while watching it. People online don't speak highly of filler episodes, and I've defended the concept in the past because I think it can be a fun way to see the characters in their downtime. Though with this season in particular, I felt like that was something that got in the way of the story. You'll get an episode that's important to the plot, but then an episode that's just completely unrelated right after, and when you're interested in seeing what happens next, it does make the filler content feel like a pacebreaker. Particularly when I don't care for the episode in question, like, say, Mazes and Mutants, which comes between a big two-part episode and the episode where Stockman gets mutated. The premise is already kind of cliche as the Turtles play a role-playing game that becomes real life for 22 minutes. It just feels like something you've seen 100 other times before, and they don't really do anything new with the idea. Though the worst example was the Pizza Face episode where there's an epidemic of pizza that comes alive and turns people into zombies that walk themselves into being turned into calzone that the big pizza monster wants to eat. And the episode ends with it being a dream Michelangelo had, or maybe not, but like, yeah, when that comes between two more important episodes, it does feel like a waste of time. Though my least favorite episode this season wasn't even filler. It was the Shell Acne episode where Michelangelo gets these ooze pimples, and it just was so disgusting that I didn't even want to look at it by the end. But back on subject, that's not to say these episodes that are not directly about Shredder and or the Krang are bad by default, because they're often really good, like when Raph's pet turtle gets turned into a villainous mutant named Slash. I liked this one because it showed how Raph's anger problems are a product of his actually being really sensitive and emotional, and his pet turtle was his one outlet for venting, and now it's turned into a villain. But you get rewarded for watching these smaller episodes when they eventually become roped into the larger episode. Slash, for example, goes from the villain of his debut episode to a supporting anti-hero when he teams up with the Neutralizer to fight the Krang in a later episode and then joins forces with the Turtles at the end. Most side episodes in this show offer some kind of meaningful anecdote for the characters they focus on, like the Rat King's return being one of the rare moments where Splinter takes center stage in a fight and asserts that his remaining humanity is his greatest strength. So yeah, my point is that the season doesn't have much in the way of episode duds, but I feel like the pacing was kind of slow because the important episodes got spaced out the way that they did. I was going to say that binging a show you've never seen before would cause this, however I think waiting week to week as a kid watching this actually would have made it worse. But I can't speak on that, obviously, because that's not how I experienced the show. Season 2 advances the series in many ways. Chief among them is how they changed the status quo somewhat frequently. For example, this season is one where Shredder decides to replace his human ninja army with Krang Tech robots, fusing the different iterations of the Foot Clan from previous versions together like the first season did with many other TMNT concepts. But this changes the show since it was a recurring plot point that the human ninjas were weak and pathetic and the robots are actually pretty strong and give the Turtles a run for their money, which makes the action scenes more interesting to watch. And with them being robots, it actually allows the action scenes to be more brutal as the Turtles can now cut through their enemies with their weapons, which again makes the action scenes more entertaining. A few episodes in, while April is still mad at the Turtles, she meets Casey Jones, who's also a teenager in this incarnation. While this is a much different Casey from any of the ones done before, he still retains the core DNA of the character by crushing on April and getting along with and occasionally butting heads with Raph, using various sports equipment to bash through bad guys as well, just with the personality of a teen in this one. Casey is voiced by Josh Peck, and he bounces off with Mae Whitman as April and Sean Astin as Raph pretty well. He's integrated well into the core cast pretty quick. Although, Casey and April's dynamic gets mixed in with the existing plotline of Don having a crush on April, and this merited some extra commentary. Something I've come to realize is this entire subplot is one that is divisive at the least. I had said I thought it was a decent addition to the show before. The reason was that the goal was to make the Turtles feel like teens, and to that end, they were successful. But I am totally with everyone in saying that it's cringe city because it is. Now that it becomes a love triangle in Season 2, it remains cringe throughout. Now, whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you. On the one hand, yeah, the writers nailed down a teen mutant turtle nerd, but since Dawn is repeatedly given the lesson that there's no chance and she's not interested, the gag starts to overstay its welcome and gets to the point we just want to hit the mute button during scenes like this.
Now that it's the end of the world and all, again, I figured I'd better just...
I guess this is a limitation that's come up from my not having watched this before. I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm just reacting as I go. Guess we'll see if it gets weirder and or more annoying in the future. And no, that was not an invitation to spoil every plot point in the show in the comments. I don't know why people do that when saying you don't know what happens yet. Anyway, the April plotline I was even more iffy on was the reveal that April is like the chosen one of the Krang. They've been planning their Earth takeover from Dimension X for thousands of years and have been slowly perfecting their mutagen in that time, and they need some specific human DNA to do it. They were experimenting on April's mother, and that made April the person they needed to complete their mutagen, and it also means she has some dormant alien superpowers. It's not that this is contrived or anything, it was clearly built up to from the beginning of the show. I just felt like it was a little much. I like how the turtles in this, as far as I'm aware, are just a product of a pure accident, but then end up being the ones to fight the Krang. But them coincidentally stumbling upon the Krang chosen one as they were capturing her on their first night out of the sewers is a pretty massive coincidence. And then she happens to befriend the turtles and is crucial in their goal to stop the Krang. It's not impossible, it's just a lot. But as I was saying earlier, this season heavily revolves around mutations. It's something one of the showrunners said in the lead up to the series' release, that the TMNT brand is the undisputed champion of mutations. It's something I've never thought about before, but it is a series well known for cool monster designs, and the 2012 series really leaned into that because with this mutagen being a main thing, you can just come up with whatever designs you want to. The intro even gets an update halfway through the season to include all the new bad guys. For starters, Dog Pound is given a secondary mutation and is called Razar, a callback to the second TMNT movie. Or how Stockman gets mutated and becomes a fly monster, which, as per usual in this show, takes the 1987 Stockman who became a mutant fly and fused it with an otherwise more regular depiction of the character. Then they just introduce new mutants like Tiger Claw as the super tough assassin that goes toe-to-toe with Splinter in an episode, and even holds his own against him, which made him actually kind of threatening too. I thought it was funny how Tiger Claw got banished to the 1987 Turtles dimension at the end of an episode. They even got the OG Turtles back to voice the cameo.
You know what that means, right, Leonardo? We take down the creepy crawler, and then we order pizza. Yes! Turtle power! Cowabunga!
But then they actually bring it up again when Tiger Claw returns in a few episodes' time, which I also thought was funny. But more significantly, Karai gets mutated into a snake monster towards the end of the season. I thought Season 2 handled this arc in a pretty good way. It felt like every Karai episode advanced the story in an important way, like her pretending to believe Splinter is her real father to set a trap for the Turtles and Splinter, only to actually be convinced and learn the truth as she tries to turn on Shredder only to be imprisoned for a few episodes. I just thought this was pretty interesting drama as a longtime fan of the series, since you just don't know what direction they're going to take it in as the episodes go on, since it's such a new story. It shows an interesting side of every character, like how Splinter is usually reserved and collected, but in episodes involving Karai, he's at his most eager to get involved for obvious reasons, and can be easy to anger in those episodes, even at the Turtles or April. And then Shredder is actually upset when Karai is turned into a monster despite emotionally abusing her throughout her entire life and kidnapping her as a baby. Maybe he's upset because he can't manipulate an actual monster like he could a person, or maybe he felt some shred of attachment to her.
And now I would just like to add mid-edit, well, I just realized that was not supposed to be a pun, but the way I delivered it made it sound like I was like super proud of the epic pun I just came up with, but that was not a pun because it wasn't even in the script to begin with. I was going off script just now like I am right now. So back to the script.
I'm just saying that I thought these were intriguing dynamics. Though while I'm on the subject of Karai's story, I'm pretty confused about why the writers introduced Karai with the story of Leo having a crush on her in Season 1. I mean, they already knew they were going in this direction as early as Season 1 since the twist is revealed in Season 1. Leo and Karai were not love interests before this in other incarnations, just friends who were on opposite sides. So, I'm just saying, I don't know why they even bothered, because that element is dropped pretty quick to make room for the narrative of Karai being Splinter's daughter. But all these plot points lead to a pretty cool finale episode where a lot of things go down. For example, the Krang finally find the Turtles' lair and destroy it, separating Splinter from the Turtles. The Krang complete their invasion of Earth that was thwarted in the previous season finale and start mutating the entire city. Along the way, there are some cool Easter eggs too, like how the Earth Protection Force arrives to fight the Krang, which I believe is the first 2003 series concept brought into the 2012 show. I know this show eventually does its own take on Agent Bishop, so I'm curious if there will be a connection there. I also thought it was a cool twist how April's friend Irma was a Krang spy. You don't think anything of her while watching this show besides it being a reference to Irma from the 87 Turtles show. But no, it's a Krang spy, and that was actually kind of foreshadowed in this silly filler episode about a ghost spirit that lived inside an artifact. It was drawing on the power of April and Irma to give it a physical form. Somehow that detail washed right over me when I first saw it. During this finale, Leo was separated from his brothers, and they used this as a chance to do the Leo gets ambushed by the Foot and tossed through the window at April's story as well. Splinter almost getting killed by Shredder and living thanks to Karai, while the Turtles, April, and Casey escape the city and go up north, setting up the farmhouse arc for Season 3 and ending Season 2 on a pretty exciting cliffhanger. As I said, they crammed in a ton of action and status quo shifts in this two-part final episode, and I was definitely with it while watching. It made me pretty excited for Season 3. Guess that's the perk of having a popular show. You already know you're getting renewed, so you can keep the story going. The show was renewed for a third season on February 26th of 2013, when the series was only 16 episodes into the run of its first season. As I said up top, this version of the TMNT was quite popular. The fans didn't have to wait too long for it to wrap up, though. There was a few months break between episodes 22 and 23 of Season 2, but Season 3 just picked up the next week after the Season 2 finale on October 3rd of 2014. One of my favorite things about the comment section of the previous video was the fact that the fans who grew up with the 2012 Turtles talked about how the Season 2 finale was so shocking to them because of how it was the first time they'd ever seen a story where the heroes lose, and lost big time and then the story just ends. Obviously, as a 23-year-old, my experience of the story isn't that, since I already know this is a famous TMNT arc they were adapting, and I just thought it was cool to see the 2012 take on it. But the fact that it would be utterly mind-blowing for a kid is a perspective I hadn't considered. But it is those little anecdotes that make a formative experience with storytelling all the more memorable, which is something I was trying to say in part 1 of my 2003 series retrospective back in 2021. Although that wasn't my first experience with such a plot twist, as I didn't catch the early seasons of that when it came out. My first time getting my mind blown by a plot twist was a video game I've talked into the ground over the years. But yeah, I just wanted to share that since I thought it was a really cool thing to read in the comments of the previous video. Now anyway, Season 3 began on October 3rd of 2014 with Episode 1, Within the Woods. The recap is narrated by April as she catches you up to speed in the Season 2 finale. But I also love how they took this moment as an opportunity to do an homage to the very same part in the 1990 TMNT movie where April narrated on the state of the Turtles at the farmhouse. That was a cool touch. But more importantly, Leo is back to being conscious in this episode, but something major has changed about him.
I've been out that long?
So, why does he sound different?
He sustained damage to his throat, and pretty much everywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, he's got a new voice. This was something I knew was coming from the beginning of the project. In the first season and about 3/4 of the second season, Leo was voiced by Jason Biggs, but this is a problem for Nickelodeon from day one. His most famous work was an R-rated comedy called American Pie, and most of his filmography is R-rated stuff, which shouldn't be an issue. Actors can be in all sorts of projects, but it was on social media where the issue really came up. When the TMNT social media was unveiling the cast on Twitter, they tagged Jason Biggs' account where he was known to make incredibly vulgar remarks that made a lot of parents who could see this feel uneasy about him being associated with the child-friendly Ninja Turtles franchise. What really caused a storm was when he had said something pretty vulgar regarding the wife of Paul Ryan while live tweeting the RNC in 2012. Now, when it was one instant before the show premiered, it was easy for Nickelodeon to put out a public apology on September 5th of 2012. But once the show was in high gear, it was a lot more difficult to ignore as Biggs just doubled down on the behavior that put his relationship with Nick in jeopardy. They told him the phone was literally ringing off the hook about it and just decided to be done with him halfway through Season 2. I was kinda confused at first, wondering how tweets from the early 2010s caused this much of a storm to where people would call the network, until I saw it was a story on Fox News. That would explain everything. Questioning someone's employment after vulgar remarks in 2012 and then complaining about sexy M&Ms getting cancelled 10 years later. That's a completely different story. Anyway, I first noticed in the middle of Season 2, during episodes that Biggs had recorded, that a different actor did some retakes, like this part of the Wormquake episode.
There's something you should know. It's about your father. Your real name is Miwa.
That actor was named Dominic Catrambone. And fun fact, he actually played Leonardo in the video games that were based on the 2012 series. Everyone else had their actors from the series. So they got him to play Leo in the last crop of episodes for Season 2. And I personally thought he did an excellent job. However, I guess he was always considered a stand-in voice by the production team, since before Season 3 aired, it was announced that the new permanent voice of Leonardo in the series going forward was Seth Green, who began in Season 3 and indeed lasted from then to the end of Season 5. I always find recasts to be a bit awkward since the actor is starting from scratch with a pre-established character that the audience got to know and the other actors built rapport and experience alongside, but you get used to it pretty fast. He gets a good grasp on the role in the first few episodes. Maybe it really is just because he was the first of the three, but Jason Biggs is my favorite of the three 2012 Leos. He just sounded the most fitting for the role as the teenage leader. I thought he did a really good job. I can see why he was let go of though, so I don't have a side I'm taking here. I can only really comment on the final product. I think all three are good in the role, and if you have a favorite, I can see why it would be any one of these three. And it's nice that the show at least bothered addressing it before moving on and never mentioning it again. Other shows wouldn't do that much. So I respect what the team behind the series did and how they went about it, but with that said, we can now talk about the episodes. When getting into this season, I was a bit concerned about the fact that the farmhouse arc takes up 8 episodes of a 26-episode season. We can talk more about this in season 4, but I feel like this compounds upon what I was saying last time. I had said that my biggest issue was season 2 that it was paced really slowly by having insignificant episodes placed directly between important arc-heavy episodes. Season 3 has a similar issue, in that I wouldn't say these episodes aren't relevant, but I think this show has an issue of spending too long on certain things. In the 2003 series, for example, the Turtles move to April's house at the end of Notes from the Underground Part 3, and then we get one episode of what it's like living there, and then it's time for Shredder Strikes Back Part 1 and 2. Then you get 2 episodes of the farmhouse, and then it's time for Return to New York Parts 1 through 3. It hits the same beats, but it just didn't spend any longer on things than was needed. I must repeat, I didn't think the quality dropped in the episodes themselves. For the most part, I thought these were good episodes with enjoyable concepts, like the episode where Donnie and Casey teamed up to take on a mutant car, and then a mutant chimera in the following episode. It certainly kept me entertained while watching, but it is noticeable how the plot is centered on the Turtles hanging out in the woods for 8 episodes. I guess you can say credit to the writers for getting the most out of the assets they made, but it also feels like a diversion from the actual plot. The ongoing thread is Leo getting better, but it feels really one note as he gets a little better, but then still feels like it's never going to improve until episode 8 where he's finally back to normal. I also had one major thought while watching the early episodes of this season, which was, how many Ninja Turtles does it take to clean up a mutagen spill? I mean, season 2 was all about a citywide mutation epidemic the Turtles inadvertently caused, and then like 4 of the first 8 episodes are about mutagen outbreaks in the woods. Like, clean up your act, guys, jeez. I don't know how clearly my point is being conveyed here, because I have similar thoughts in this whole season, but that isn't meant to say I don't enjoy it, I'm just not trying to repeat myself a ton. I think this show is fun and enjoyable with a really charming cast of characters, but I just think the pacing isn't great. From this roster, I think an episode that was pretty relevant was Buried Secrets, where the group finds what they think is April's mom, but was actually a fake created by the Krang and left behind for over a decade, giving the heroes and the audience more insight into what's going on with the Krang and April's family, paying off that mystery the early episodes set up. And then the Vision Quest episode is the one where the Turtles face personal demons and decide it's time to go back home. The episode itself isn't anything to write home about, but props again because they had paid homage to one of the most iconic scenes from the 1990 movie where the Turtles commune with Splinter through the fire in the woods. Once they actually go home in episode 9, the show gets a lot more fast-paced in terms of narrative progression and character moments. They rescue Splinter in episode 9 and search for Karai in the following episodes where Bebop and Rocksteady are introduced as new members of Shredder's mutant army, and then the Krang's takeover of the city is stopped in episodes 12 and 13, Battle for New York, where the Turtles team up with some of the other mutants from the series that have their own group called the Mighty Mutanimals. The Turtles use the Technodrome in Dimension X to blast their retro mutagen to all the mutated human captives the Krang kept, while the other mutants fight the Krang at the TCRI building, holding the portal open so the Turtles can return with all the captured humans. Despite the fact that the Krang have been used as comedic relief throughout the series, even in this episode as Krang Subprime, voiced by Gilbert Gottfried, calls out the poor English they've had all series, the Krang do kind of feel threatening as villains in this episode. Especially because they spent 8 episodes away from the city, so when you come back and they're in total control, it makes them feel pretty dangerous. Once the Krang are defeated, though, is when I noticed something. The plot kind of stops after that. Nothing really happens for the following 4 episodes. In that time, they bring in new characters like Hun, who is the first 2003 character to be brought into the 2012 show, being a really skilled ninja master in this version over the brute gangster he was in the 03 series, while also still leading the Purple Dragons and working for Shredder. I thought they did a good job with Hun and gave him a rivalry with Casey in his debut episode as a nice nod to the story from the 2000 series. And then there are some other classic TMNT mutants introduced too, like Mondo Gecko, who seemed familiar to me right off the bat because they got the voice from Michelangelo from the 1990 TMNT movie to play him. His catchphrase is Cowabunga, and thanks to that, Mikey starts saying it in the show, which I thought was neat. Though I felt like a fake fan for not noticing that this incarnation of Slash is played by the voice of Donatello from the 90 movie as well. Something about him felt familiar, but I never looked into it until the comments of the last video talked about it. But in this crop of episodes, you do get a lot of winners, like the Noxious Avenger episode where the Turtles meet a mutant made of trash. I think this was one of the funnier episodes of the show as the Turtles get grounded for being discovered on TV.
Oh yeah, Krognard Marathon.
And no TV!
These are my favorite Dad Splinter moments in the show thus far.
Krognard.
And this gag about the uber-conspicuous van got me.
I can't believe they keep driving that uber-conspicuous van.
Not everybody can be as ninjas up.
But yeah, as I was saying, the plot doesn't really progress during these episodes. It's discovered that the retro mutagen doesn't work on Karai, and Donatello needs to work really hard to find a way to cure her, but then, at the beginning of episode 18, Stockman just managed to do it off screen as Karai is turned into a mindless shredder drone with these brain worms that were introduced in episode 16. This took me aback because of how big of a drama it was that she was stuck in the snake form, but then it was resolved off screen. But then, in the final crop of episodes, there are some really good ones. Although I also thought there were some episodes that felt pretty dry. Never unwatchable, but in an episode like The Creeping Doom, I was just left checking my watch as it never really felt like anything important was happening as the threat was Donnie losing his intelligence. We know that's not gonna last, and I didn't think the villain or action scenes were anything to write home about, so most of it was just me waiting for the episode to end. Although some might say you can't skip it because of the fact that thanks to Mikey's antics, Donnie's able to figure out how to cure the brain worm controlling Karai. Though in my opinion, an episode having a singular relevant bullet point doesn't make it immune from being talked about in a segment regarding smaller or filler episodes, as that could have easily happened off-screen and nobody would bat an eye, especially seeing as other important developments did happen off-screen. While on the subject of side episodes, it was Turtles in Time where I was also checking my watch a lot, even though I don't even wear one. And editor's note, that was also not meant to be a pun, because I already used the checking my watch description earlier in the video, but I realized in an episode called Turtles in Time, it's perfect. Also, I have no idea what's going on with the opening of this episode using this letterbox presentation. I just figured I would point that out while I was already going off script. But back to the script. I like the title calling back to the SNES TMNT beat-em-up, and it is worth watching for the introduction of TMNT staples like Renette, the Time Scepter, Lord Simultaneous, and Savanti Romero, but outside of the funny part with the time loop, it was also pretty by the numbers. Renette was played by Ashley Johnson, who's a fantastic actress in everything she's in, and in this series, the team behind it kept up the ongoing thing where every time Greg Sipes and Ashley Johnson are together in something, they play love interests. This one is Mikey and Renette. Though that was also the moment where you really take a step back and think, man, this show has an obsession with shipping. I'm largely ambivalent on that fact, but yeah, to all the people in the comments who say all the romantic melodrama reduces your interest in this series, I can see why. Episode 2 of the season is the big one devoted to the Donnie-April situation. In it, Don finds himself the recipient of affection from Bigfoot, who is a female... whatever species Bigfoot is. The episode runs through a lot of cliches, but you think it's finally leading towards this subplot being done as Don realizes what it's like being on the receiving end of unwanted affection, and he apologizes, which is all fine and good, only for April to then keep it going by kissing him, like... what? The writers had something good there, ending this plotline in a note of how important it is to be self-aware and to not cling on to things only to renew it 5 seconds later and continue the love triangle thing for the remainder of the series. I don't know if the online discourse is why they did it like that, like maybe fans being invested in the ship is why they kept it going, but from a writing perspective, I think ending it on this note would have been logical and played better with the remaining episodes. Like how episode 6 is the one where Donnie and Casey become proper friends and team up against the mutant car. If the love triangle story was already dead by then, it would be a non-factor in the dynamic of Casey and Donnie going forward from this point, but that's just my 2 cents on that. But I was talking about the Turtles in Time episode before that side tangent. The time travel of it all does lead to my favorite episode of the season, episode 20, Tales of the Yokai. The Turtles are sent back in time by about 16 years, and they witness the fallout between Hamato Yoshi and Oroku Saki that led to their existence. You can think of it like a fusion of the episodes Secret Origins Part 2 and Tales of Master Yoshi from the 2003 series. In that the Turtles play a part in their backstory, and it shows the fallout of Yoshi and Saki, like the 2003 episode about Yoshi and Mashimi. This was just a really compelling premise, as Splinter's backstory and personality was already something I said made him the most interesting version of the character with the most dimension. But this episode cemented that because you're used to Splinter as the wisest of wise sages, but seeing him human and young allow you to see a different side of him. You can see why Saki would become resentful towards him because they made Yoshi kind of a dick.
Yokai! Your imagination has run wild, Saki. Small green men, spirits, monsters. Your head has always been in the clouds, brother.
Saki's still the bad guy at the end of the day. We can see how this whole experience of Yoshi losing his entire family at the hands of Saki and how his relationship with Saki rotting over the years before then created the wise and reserved Splinter of the present day, rather than him just always being that way. Again, this version is easily the best iteration of Splinter I've ever seen because he's the most fleshed out character of them all. In episode 23, The Fourfold Trap, the Turtles and April are caught by Karai and Splinter has to save them. It is this episode where Karai is saved from being under the influence of Shredder, but you don't really get much time to think about it because the series moves towards its final 3 episodes right afterwards. In episode 24, the Turtles meet a delirious Triceraton called Zog. The The Triceratons are a major element of TMNT lore I had almost forgotten weren't in this series up until they appeared here. What was pretty interesting about the episode is that Zog explains that the Krang are a longtime enemy of the Triceratons. The Krang have a base inside the Statue of Liberty, and the Turtles help Zog defeat them. Already, as a fan, I'm interested in seeing what they're doing with this, as I've said a dozen times before that this new version of the Krang are fresh in terms of their ongoing scheme, but them being the enemies of the Triceratons got me more interested, since surely the Triceratons are going to be the foes of the Turtles in this like usual, so what's going to happen? The episode surprised me since the team up with Zog is not at all like the 2003 series, where he never learned that Turtles were his enemies and died sacrificing himself for them. In this one, after they stop the Krang portal, Zog finds his equipment, including a breathing apparatus that clears his mind as he fights against the Turtles, activating a beacon to the Triceraton homeworld so they can come and destroy the Earth. The Triceratons make it their mission to destroy any planet that the Krang hide in to ensure the Krang can never take over. This version of the Triceratons were already shown as a force to be reckoned with in episode 24 alone as he defeated Slash, who's one of the most powerful mutants on the show. The Turtles standing no chance against them, unlike, say, the 2003 Triceratons who went down pretty easily against the Turtles. So the odds are not in their favor in the event of an actual invasion, which is what the season finale is all about. I gotta say, this finale was pretty hardcore by the standards of a Nick show. Right off the bat, the Krang plot thickens as Bishop is introduced to the 2012 show, but this version of Bishop is nothing like the original. He's a Krang defector, as there's a whole branch of the species called the Utroms that are not under the control of Krang Prime, the antagonist that controls the Krang hive mind that the Turtles have been facing off with throughout the whole show. Yeah, this Bishop has nothing to do with being a government agent or anything like that, which doesn't really bother me. I feel like the Bishop that was created for the 03 show was born as a product of the cultural conversations of the 2000s, and with that said, I thought that version of Bishop was an expertly done villain with a good arc that had a satisfying conclusion. So no need to retrace steps. This version maintains the sunglasses and the badass ninja moves, and the secret spy element just done in an entirely different context, allowing it to stand on its own while bringing back an iconic character. But anyway, the Triceratons do invade, and I really like how, yeah, this ragtag team of mutants and teens is no match for this space alien army, and they promptly get their asses kicked. Splinter opts to recruit the Foot Clan for assistance in defeating the Triceratons, using the argument that Earth's destruction will mean Shredder will never see Karai again, and so the Foot joins the heroes in the final battle. And while you think that will turn the tides, Shredder just decides to kill Splinter before they can deactivate the black hole bomb the Triceratons set up to destroy the world. I kinda knew something like that happened, but still, it does come as a surprise that the writers just went ahead and killed off Splinter, especially with Turtles that still have a lot of growing to do, narratively speaking. It also makes this Shredder memorable because he was a villain so dead set on his vendetta, one that we actually got to see the origin of a few episodes prior, that he would rather see the entire planet get sucked into a black hole than allow Splinter to succeed. It doesn't make him the most logical of villains, nor more menacing and badass than the Utrom Shredder, who will always be the best of the best in terms of TMNT bad guys if you ask me, but it's quite the moment to say the least. But at the last second, the Turtles, April, and Casey are saved from annihilation by Professor Honeycutt, the Fugitoid. And this is the note Season 3 ends on, and it was so good that I was interested in watching Season 4 right away, and at time of writing I've already started watching Season 4 and I'm a few episodes in. Really, that just speaks to how cool of an ending Season 3 had. I may have had issues with the pacing of Season 3's story like I did with Season 2, but I say for the third time, this does not mean I had a bad experience with Season 3. Quite the opposite. I thought its plot was really good and it paid off narrative elements set up in previous seasons really well. It took slightly too long to get to each of these moments for my taste, but I thought the journey there was a lot of fun. Really, it just depends on Season 4 to stick the landing, as I believe Season 4 was meant to be the final season before Nick ordered a fifth and last one. The writers confidently ended things on a cool cliffhanger because the show had a fourth season ordered on June 17th, 2014, well before Season 3 even started airing. Season 3 ended with Annihilation Earth on September 27th of 2015, and Season 4 picked up 1 month later on October 25th of 2015. Season 4 begins right after that in Episode 1, Beyond the Known Universe, where Honeycutt explains to the group they do have one shot to save the Earth and stop the Triceratons. They pull a Superman time travel maneuver by flying around the Earth at light speed to go back 6 months. Now they can gather the pieces of the black hole generator before the Triceratons are able to build it and thus save the Earth. This quest to find the pieces and save the Earth takes up the first 14 episodes of the season. A nice detail is how they changed the intro for these episodes. Unlike a lot of other animated shows, this one changed the intro quite often to reflect changes in the status quo, like Season 2 adding the new mutant enemies and Season 3 adding the Turtles' mystic forest gear to the intro. Season 4 just makes a full space version of the intro, which I thought was pretty cool. Then they go back to the main one after episode 14. But anyway, things get complicated for the heroes because they not only have to fight against the Triceratons and the obstacles that arise from collecting the pieces of the black hole generator, but on their first trip to another planet, the heroes upset a criminal that goes by Lord Dreg, and then he's after them for the entire space portion of the season as well. This is one of those 2012 deep cuts that I thought was really well done. Lord Dreg was the main antagonist of the final 2 seasons of the 87 series after Shredder and Krang were finally defeated and they wanted a new villain. It's been a pretty long time since I last watched those episodes, so I don't remember how this version compared to the original, but I do like this design of Dreg more than the original, fully capitalizing on his being a space bug, when the original played up the Lord element more than the alien bug part. One of the points of this crop of episodes is seeing the Turtles and crew going on all kinds of space adventures. By episode 2, we get another rerun of the show's favorite thing, shipping. The Turtles end up fighting 2 Salamandrians, who are the same species as the Neutralizer enemy from earlier in the show, and I thought that was a cool callback, but when Raph became smitten with the female one that he gives the nickname Mona Lisa, is when I was like, seriously? I'd love to know what this show's obsession with shipping and romance is. Earlier in this retrospective, commenters had told me that they thought the human crushes of Leo, Don, and Mikey were all weird, but it was Raph's connection with Mona Lisa that felt the most earned and least weird. So I was curious how it was going to play out and see if I agreed. To keep this conversation as minimally awkward as I can, I don't know, it feels the same to me. The argument I often see made is that it's just bizarre that you'd have a mutant turtle human romance, and that's why it's better for Raph and this space alien. However, I fail to see the difference beyond aesthetics. Raph isn't a salamandrian, he's a mutant turtle from Earth. They're completely different species. I don't really care because this is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's plenty of room for suspension of disbelief here, but that was why I was never really on the side of Don's crush on April being weird because of the turtle thing, because I mean, he's a mutant turtle that has the brain function of a human. And on that note, this April has psychic powers she got from aliens, so it's already 10 galaxies away from real life logic, so I think getting upset about it on a species level is just reading too deep into it, frankly. But on the other hand, I think the show does have an inordinate interest in this, and the execution isn't that great across the whole show. For starters, I already went into the fact that I thought the writers had the chance in episode 2 of season 3 to end the whole Don-April thing on a good note of Donatello realizing, after everyone trying to tell him this all series long, that he was in the wrong for a lot of that obsessive behavior. It might have been a nice moral lesson for the audience to learn, as it's a tale as old as time. But then the writers undid it mere seconds later and kept the love triangle subplot going with no resolution for the rest of the show. I just don't know what the writers were going for with that one. Then I also wasn't sure what they were thinking when they made Karai a brief love interest to Leo, knowing full well that this Karai was the true daughter of Master Splinter. To their credit, the subplot was completely dropped from then on, but since all of that happened in season 1, I just have to wonder why they even bothered. Then Mikey had the crush on Renette that lasted 1 episode, and I'm sure it will keep going when she comes back in season 5, but I haven't seen it yet, so I wouldn't know. But then midway through season 4, Karai has a new partner in crime named Shinigami, and then they gave Mikey a crush on her too that goes nowhere, being dropped in the same episode that it was introduced in. And then Raph has this thing with Mona Lisa that's relevant for 2 or 3 episodes of season 4, and that's it. Besides Donnie and April, all of these feel the same to me. Very surface level and gimmicky, done to advance the plot of the episode in question and little else. It just makes me wonder, did the writers find all this shipping funny? Did they think it was endearing? Did they think it was needed for a show about teens? I have no clue. But it is pretty interesting how the show seldom introduced a female character without a turtle having a crush on them that served no purpose to the story. Again, I feel like it is ultimately harmless, just funny to note how often it was done. It's been a very, very long time since I last watched the show, but Teen Titans was a similar kind of show, and I felt like that show's romantic subplots were handled a lot more carefully as they built connections over multiple episodes and provided resolution for them, and that would have been a good model to look at, if they felt like this was a necessary addition to the series. But with this being the second to last season, here's hoping it's the last mention I have to make of it. So anyway, it was during these space episodes where I was most curious how the pacing was going to be. In the previous video, I said I was most concerned about the space saga lasting 14 episodes. I just hoped it wouldn't be boring or go on too long. After all, the show dragging its heels has been my biggest issue thus far, however it was during this space arc when I had an epiphany. I think I was experiencing the show from the wrong lens. Sure, I vastly prefer the 2003 series' laser-like focus on pushing arcs forward, even in seemingly unrelated episodes, but I don't think the 2012 series is inherently doing something wrong. I think the show isn't trying to be like the 2003 series in terms of how it tells its story. Looking back at all that I've seen of the 2012 series, I think they just use arcs as the backdrop element. It's the thing that advances the series from season to season, but the individual episodes are meant to be enjoyed as comedy, action adventures where you get to see a variety of cool-looking mutants or space aliens, while one of or all the heroes go through a lesson in the episode that will probably be repeated ad nauseum before the show is over. Plus, it's also a 3D animated series, which means every background is a set that had to be 3D modeled, so therefore the farmhouse arc, or in the space saga, you'd want to get as much time out of these locations as possible to make sure the time spent building the assets was used to maximum effect. But it turns out, I was definitely onto something when I thought of this. In the comments of the last video, somebody told me that on an interview, Brandon Auman, the main writer for seasons 2 through 5, had talked about how Nickelodeon had discouraged the team from focusing heavily on arcs over standalone episodes. Which, like I said, more or less confirmed I was onto something and that this was how the show was meant to be enjoyed.
Are you, from a writing perspective, looking at it from, okay, what's the arc of the season, working your way backwards? Are you breaking it down?
Usually for me, it's like, it really depends on the series that you're working on. Like with TMNT, like there was a real push with Nickelodeon, like to make, like the season feel largely standalone. Like episodes would feel standalone, but because, they just didn't know if they were going to air out of order, or they just like the idea of like, look, you just come into it, and this is just, it's a standalone, you don't have to like worry about this giant arc, so they kind of pushed us away from any kind of big arc, although we still had big arcs like throughout the season, like if it was like the rise of Shredder or, whatever it was. And then with Star Wars, it's like, to me though, that's always difficult because as soon as you get deeper and deeper into like a season, there's always going to be, no matter what, like arcs to it, and there's going to be things that have happened previously that you want to reference. So, it's a balancing act of like saying, okay, this is still kind of standalone, but it still has to function in some kind of an arc.
The overarching plot was a background element that was still very important. So special thanks to that commenter who is called, Squidward Tentacles. I didn't know he watched my videos. But within the space arc is one episode I was really looking forward to watching. Episode 10, Transdimensional Turtles. In it, the 2012 Turtles are pulled into the 1987 dimension by a portal stick that Donatello had. It's a pretty jam-packed 22 minutes as the 8 heroes battle in the 87 dimension, the 2012 dimension, and go to Dimension X and even visit Turtle Prime, the comic book world. I was very curious about this episode because I wanted to see how it was going to compare to Turtles Forever, the finale of the 2003 series that I covered almost 2 years ago. Turtles Forever had a lot working against it, first because of how it didn't bring back the classic Turtles as voice actors and couldn't use the iconic music from the show, but then the way the world was portrayed felt more spiteful towards it than irreverent. So knowing there was an 87 crossover in the 2012 show got me curious how the execution was going to be. What I found fascinating about this episode was they pulled a lot of the same jokes at the expense of the 87 Turtles, like how they can't fight or how they don't use their weapons in combat almost ever, and how their world is cartoony and ridiculous. The 2012 Raphael even pulls the exact same joke the 2003 Raph did about how the initialized belt buckles was really stupid. The plot is also surprisingly similar to Turtles Forever, in that there's a plot to destroy the Turtleverse by first destroying these dimensions, but then trying to go to the source of all Ninja Turtles, the 84 comic world. But the main difference between the two is that you can tell these jokes are out of love since it does feel pretty authentic.
Where the heck did you get pizza? Give me a break.
For example, each of the 87 Turtles is characterized in an authentic way, instead of them all being a hive mind of idiocy like Turtles Forever. The original actors are back, and that adds a lot of nostalgia to the appearance, and the music is there too.
The Donatellos will disarm the weapon. Everyone else, take down that creep! Turtle power!
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold up with the turtle power for a second. You don't give orders to my team, okay?
Also making the jokes you'd expect, like 87 Raphael and 2012 Donatello talking to each other.
And you, Gappy, why do you sound so weird? Me sound weird? Heard yourself lately?
The one thing I could say I have against this episode, especially compared to Turtles Forever, is that I think it looks kind of cheap. The 87 world is done with this flash-looking animation that doesn't really look anything like the original series, when the art design was where Turtles Forever really struck gold. But that doesn't diminish the joy I felt watching the episode, as it also managed to be somewhat relevant to the plot. As it turns out that the 87 Krang, who was always trying to get back to Dimension X, is a member of the Krang species from the 2012 series, and he was banished to the 87 cartoon world a long time ago. They come from the exact same Dimension X, it turns out. Not that that has to have any impact on you while watching the 87 show, but it's a really funny way to tie the universes together. Also, this episode marks the defeat of Krang Subprime and leads to the Krang being defeated for good later in the season, so it's a story-relevant episode. one that ends in a funny way too, because the 2012 Turtles are pulled from Season 4, obviously, but then at the end of the episode you find out this adventure for the 87 Turtles occurs right before their cameo in Season 2, as that cameo is the ending of the episode and we see them fight Tiger Claw, as he said he battled the 87 Turtles when he returned a few episodes after Wormquake from Season 2. So that was pretty neat, and that was definitely a lot of words I just said, so moving on. Besides that, there isn't much else I'd like to comment on regarding the Space Saga. I thought these episodes were really good, as the writers made the Triceratons really tough enemies for the heroes to defeat, and the characters and their interactions were made really strong throughout the episodes. Seeing all different parts of the galaxy, including an episode where they meet Bishop in the past and the other Utroms in their mission to find pieces of the black hole generator. I liked this version of Professor Honeycutt, but I thought the 2000s version was a better integrated character across the 2 seasons he played a major role in. This version of Honeycutt actually built the black hole generator and needs the help of the Turtles to destroy it, but there isn't much to him or his relationships with the characters in the episodes he's in. But I did think it was funny how he'd occasionally beep at the end of sentences. Despite all their work though, the Turtles lose the black hole generator pieces to the Triceratons as they begin their invasion of Earth, but as you might expect, the Turtles are able to arrive and deactivate the machine with the help of their past selves, as Honeycutt sacrifices himself to destroy the black hole generator and the Triceraton homeworld. What was really weird was that there are now just 2 sets of Turtles and Casey and April in this new timeline. So what does happen is that the Honeycutt from 6 months in the past still arrives, and he takes the version of the heroes from the past and brings them on a trek across the universe, while the heroes that did just go on a 6-month space mission just take the place of their past selves in the original timeline. Hope the past selves don't mind never seeing their friends or family again, but the good news is they also managed to save Splinter in this episode, as Shredder is defeated badly enough to be out of commission for a few episodes. It was throughout the next crop of episodes where I realized that I don't think Shredder's army makes for a super interesting set of bad guys. I mean, they're okay, but with Shredder out of the picture for a brief period and the Krang being totally gone, you're just left with the heroes battling the likes of Tiger Claw and Bebop and Rocksteady, and I don't find these bad guys compelling enough for whole episodes at a time. But it is in these episodes where April finally becomes a fully fledged ninja and joins the team on pretty much every mission. Casey does too, but without the skills and superpowers that April has. Karai is trying to build her own Foot Clan in these episodes in competition with the remaining goons still loyal to Shredder. And that is when the show introduces Shinigami as Karai's ally, but beyond that, not much really happens in this crop of episodes. I liked the Bat and the Belfry episode. I'm kind of a sucker for parodies and homages to Silver Age comic books, and this one about Wingnut and Screwloose parodying Batman and Robin was really entertaining, as they come to life from the pages of a comic for an episode and have a wacky adventure with Michelangelo and Casey. In the final set of episodes, Shredder returns, only pumped with enough mutagen to turn him into the Super Shredder as a nod to Turtles 2. In hindsight, I feel like the Turtles didn't really get to battle with the regular Shredder much in this series. The biggest moments were in Season 1, but past that and a few brief one-on-ones, Shredder mostly fought Splinter if he ever bothered getting off his throne to begin with. But now the Turtles have to contend with this monster Shredder who still mostly goes after Splinter. I mean, seriously, Splinter cannot catch a break in this show at all. At the end of one episode this season, Splinter tries to take Shredder down into the abyss, only for them both to live through it, and Splinter falling like 1,000 stories and spends most of the next episode trying to survive at the bottom of an abyss. This episode has some pretty twisted imagery in it, as Splinter sees hallucinations of the Rat King and finds his corpse at the end, but like I said, he managed to survive all that. But then there's this episode where April's superpowers go out of control because of an alien crystal she got from Honeycutt, and she got possessed and attacked Splinter at one moment. Like I said, he cannot catch a break this season at all. Though I guess Donatello had it worse because he literally got atomized in this episode only to come back at the end. Before the actual finale though, you get one last normal episode. I only feel like highlighting it because of the fact that it involves a space turtle called Toka arriving on Earth. During the space saga, Raph took its baby thinking Toka had died in a supernova, giving Raph a new pet turtle to interact with. Something about the Turtles having pets is always really cute to me, like Mikey having a cat is a franchise staple, but I think this version that's a mutant cat that got turned into Ice Cream is probably my favorite iteration. They managed to give Ice Cream Kitty a personality, and I always found it really endearing. But more importantly, I thought this was a cool way to do Toka. When they turned Dog Pound into Razar earlier in the series, you would obviously assume Toka was around the corner to complete the Turtles 2 homage, but they made Toka a space alien instead of a mutant, which is surprising. The main reason I'm even talking about this episode, though, is that Bishop is now Agent Bishop and is a liaison between the Utroms and the Earth by commanding the EPF. I thought that was pretty cool, though this Bishop can confirm is just not as cool as the original. He has a lot of the badass moves, but he usually gets taken down when the 2003 version almost never did and was always using these super creative fighting techniques. But that's neither here nor there. In the last 2 episodes, shit gets pretty real as Super Shredder decides he wants to just kill Karai and everyone else he stands against and just tears through all the heroes in battle. At the beginning of episode 25, you get a scene that shows how far the characters have come. Splinter can sense that his time remaining is limited and preps Leo for being the one in charge of the family. This would be an emotionally resonant scene in its own, but they specifically call back to episode 2 of the first season, which is where you reflect on the journey thus far.
Do you know why you are leader of this team?
Yeah, because I asked to be. You said it wasn't because of my skills.
And I think I figured out why you made me leader.
Oh? Why is that?
Because you sensed inside me a true warrior spirit.
No.
No? Then why did you make me leader?
Because you asked.
That's it?
I said that only to temper your ego at the time. I knew even when you were a small boy that you would one day grow up to be the leader of this team. And when I pass on, to be like a father as well.
I also realized how weird it was to watch a season 1 clip after watching so many of the later episodes. You almost forget how much better the animators have gotten at their craft until you go back to the beginning and compare how the characters move and emote. Episode 25 ends with a big fight between Splinter and Super Shredder that you just have to imagine Splinter's going to win, because I mean, they already pulled the Master Splinter death scene in the last season finale, only for Splinter to get an even more painful demise, being stabbed through the abdomen by Super Shredder and being tossed off this skyscraper and slamming onto the pavement. Like, goddamn. But it's pretty clear right away that there is no time-traveling Fugitoid to save Splinter this time. He's actually gone this time. His spirit tells Leonardo in the finale that it's time to end the Shredder for good. And I really like how the finale wastes no time. The Turtles, April, and Casey get the location of Shredder's secret shoreside home from Karai and raid it. Along the way, they fight many of the mutants they've been battling for the whole series, like Fishface, Bebop, Rocksteady, and Tiger Claw. Also, they reverse the mutation of Baxter Stockman in the process. It's just one action set piece after another, and I think it's great. Not 2003 Return to New York great, but it's a great finale episode with a fantastic battle between the Turtles and Super Shredder to cap it off. When looking at it from the lens of an intended series finale, I think it did the job just fine. I mean, the mutants I just mentioned seem to be defeated for good here, and Leo slices Shredder's head off after a one-on-one with him. It's really climactic and would have been a good ending for the show. I mean, the actual ending of the episode doesn't really say much besides, well team, we did it, and we'll do it again whenever evil comes back, but it's not like there needed to be a comprehensive ending. The bad guy's dead and the team is ready to face whatever lies ahead, knowing their master is with them in spirit. But yeah, this was not the last episode. This was intended to be the last season, which is why the Krang and the Foot are seemingly defeated here. However, Nick ordered more episodes while their next iteration of TMNT was probably in the pre-production process. So the show got 20 more episodes, and that was season 5. How that fares is the story of the next video. I'm curious to see it because TMNT shows lingering well past their natural expiration date is not new to the 2012 show, that's for sure. However, that doesn't mean it's destined to not be good. But before I even think about it, somebody commented on one of the previous videos asking where you can watch the 2012 TMNT series, and since we've reached the last video, I figured I'd talk about it now. But don't worry, this segment won't last 10 minutes like it did in the 2003 retrospective. In fact, it won't even last 2. In the 2000s and before, you get a plethora of those tiny DVD sets that only had a couple of episodes on them, and for some shows, that was it as far as home video was concerned. But into the 2010s, things were a lot different. Now, the 2012 show still had a fair share of tiny DVD episodes that you'd find at Target or Walmart or whatever, but anybody who wants to watch this series doesn't need to collect them. The entire 2012 TMNT show is on Paramount Plus, if you happen to be the person in your friend group who owns an account there. But if you are fond of physical media, instead you can mosey on over to Amazon and pick up the complete series pack of TMNT 2012, all 5 seasons, every episode. And that's that. I don't actually own this box set, but I probably should pick it up since I do own the complete box set for the 1987 TMNT series and the fucking Next Mutation 1-season DVD. But on that note, I figured I'd update the world on the fact that in 2023, the world was finally given that which it hungered most for. A complete box set of the 2003 TMNT show. And yeah, that's what everyone in the world wanted the most, don't fact check that. All 7 seasons and Turtles Forever finally together in an easily found and owned set. I pre-ordered that immediately, though I should warn everyone watching that the set itself is actually quite poor in quality. There is a video from the channel remastering TMNT 2003 that went over, in detail, why the picture quality on this set was a mess. I can say it's a win that we got it though, but it not being good was definitely disappointing. But I guess I can talk more about the 2003 series being back later in the video. So to get into Season 5 of the 2012 show properly, I'll give a recap of anyone who missed the last video. Season 4 of the 2012 show was meant to be the last one when it was conceived, and it certainly shows. Half of it was spent in an odyssey across the universe trying to undo the ending of the 3rd season. Then the back half was building up to the finale where the Turtles and their allies would battle and defeat the Super Shredder. In the penultimate episode, Master Splinter was killed off a second time with no time-traveling do-over in sight. They wanted the ending to carry some real weight to it. However, on July 10th of 2015, Nick had ordered a 20-episode 5th season, which was a few months before season 4 had started airing. I was pretty curious about how this one was gonna go, given the fact that the first 2 TMNT cartoons also had phases where they clearly extended past their natural expiration. But those seasons still produced worthwhile episodes and characters that people remember fondly to this day. So a season that goes past the intended finale certainly shouldn't be counted out before giving it a try. I will say this though, this season from the outside looking in definitely seemed as though it existed to fill a TMNT content gap between 2012 season 4 and the next show, Rise of the TMNT, which started in 2018. I mean, Rise was announced for a 2018 release date before the 5th season had even started airing. So the focus was already shifting to the next thing. And then the 5th season we got did that late stage TMNT thing where they change up the intro, but then they also did that thing where they added a subtitle to the series as it's now Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Totally unique. Not saying that means it's going to be bad, but it just made me curious how it's going to go. Contrary to all the previous seasons where I said that an issue for me was how the seasons would have one main arc and toss a bunch of side episodes into the mix, ultimately made the arcs take way longer to unfold than they probably needed to, Season 5 is actually pretty focused on current stories. This season gets its name from the fact that it's a collection of stories. The first 4 episodes are about the revival of Shredder, then 2 episodes about the return of Lord Dreg, 3 in the dimension of Usagi, 1 standalone flashback episode, 3 in an alternate future, 4 that deal with horror movie monsters, and a final crossover with the 87 series in the last 3 episodes. So this season doesn't have an overall story, just sets of stories that take place one after another. I don't really have a preference either way, but I just thought it was interesting to note since technically this approach does mean that my long-running issue has now been somewhat fixed. Though I feel like I have even less to say about this season than I did the other ones. In the first arc, I thought it was pretty surprising that they dive right into reviving Shredder as a plotline so soon after his death, but that was before I saw what the plot structure of Season 5 was. The premise is that Tiger Claw is leading a cult of loyalists that are trying to bring Shredder back with the power of a demon called Cravaxis, voiced by Mark Hamill, and the Turtles plus April, Casey, and Karai try to stop it from happening. And ultimately, they need to defeat Shredder and Cravaxis once a bunch of spirits are released from the afterlife, including Splinter, who gets to beat up a few spirits himself. I think the Turtles trying to stop Tiger Claw and other loyalists was enough of a threat for these episodes that I don't really feel like reviving Shredder was actually necessary though. When reflecting, I don't feel like he really added much to the episodes, especially since he plunged both himself and Cravaxis into the underworld at the end. I think using his revival with a demon was good enough as a threat, but not as a plot line that actually happened, since I don't feel like he did much that was interesting, or furthered his character from what we already got in the first 4 seasons. But still, these were good episodes and started the season off well. But once that threat is eliminated, you get a 2-part episode that wraps up all the space sci-fi elements of the show. Lord Dreg has made it to Earth, and with the help of the Neutralizer, who's hunting the Utroms, they intend on killing the heroes for good. I don't know how Dreg survived being sent into the void of space in Season 4, as that's not addressed at all, but he's back now. In this episode, the other 2 Salamandrian characters from Season 4 are back, and the male one has a bone to pick with the Neutralizer, so that adds some tension. Plus, you get a bunch of returning characters like Agent Bishop teaming up with the heroes. It's another good set of episodes, although it is funny how they tried pulling a Mikey death and then later a Mikey sacrifice in the same episode, because that's surely gonna happen, right? Though in retrospect, what I thought was kind of sad about this set of episodes was that after it was over, the series basically drops Casey, April, and Karai as main characters. April and Casey do cameo in the horror movie monster arc and also get brief cameos in the final set of episodes, but the fight against Lord Dreg is the last time they're focused on, and although it seems some would prefer the story just be about the Turtles, but I don't know. I got pretty used to April at least being in almost every episode. She became a disciple of Splinter that was, by the end of Season 4, roughly on the level of the Turtles, so her and Casey not being in the following 7 episodes is something I definitely took notice of. But what does happen is that the next 3 episodes see the Turtles transported to the dimension of Miyamoto Usagi, another comic book character that the TMNT have crossed over with in just about every incarnation. Though I wouldn't be surprised if more people recognized him as a TMNT guest character than his own star at this point. Anyway, they have to work with Usagi across 3 episodes to transport this royal kid to a mountain temple. Despite not getting as much airtime as the 2003 Usagi, I think this version managed to be a capable badass that left an impression in a fraction of the screen time, which was impressive. The writers and artists exploring new concepts because of this alternate dimension, like the Turtles getting dressed up as samurai, possibly a reference to TMNT 3, and then spending an episode dealing with Tanuki and a giant spider cave before finally reaching the mountain in the 3rd episode. Episode 10 is a one-off where we see Splinter telling a story to the toddler Turtles, and this is our first time seeing them too, about when they were just starting out. I really loved this episode because Splinter's interactions with the baby and toddler Turtles is really cute. The episode including moments like seeing why Raph's plastron is cracked, as the Turtles and Splinter were being pursued by the Krang who wanted to make sure there were no stray mutants, but Splinter had the skills to evade them until they eventually found the subway tunnel that became the lair. And at the end, Splinter gives the Turtles their weapons for the first time. It's just a nice, nostalgic episode now that the series is about to end, and it's really good to see Splinter again because, as I've said, this is definitely my favorite incarnation of the character that I've ever seen. Though while I watched it, I did think of a few things that required me to bust out the old tinfoil because there are some inconsistencies here. Such as the fact that toddler Leo is Seth Green's voice, but what the heck, the show clearly established that Leo having a much different voice as a result of battle damage. Though on that note, Season 4 had a flashback to the Happy Mutation Day scene from Season 1 where Seth Green redubbed Jason Biggs' lines, so talk about inconsistent, am I right? Also, while this isn't a plot hole per se, the fact that Splinter fully battled the Krang and saw their true forms and never mentioned that later is pretty sus, Splinter. I mean, imagine if in episode 2 when Mikey says,
"Like that robot with the brain thingy."
Give it a rest.
Splinter was like, "No, my sons, remember the story I told you all about us being pursued by robo-aliens? This has gotta be them." But I can't even call that a plot hole, as maybe he just didn't want to say. There is certainly precedent for that. But like always, I remind that when talking about things that are good, plot hole discourse is just me poking fun for a laugh. I really enjoyed this episode, and it was probably my favorite one from Season 5. Now here's where things get pretty bizarre. The next 3 episodes aired are actually the last 3 that ever got produced. The Raphael Mutant Apocalypse saga. If you're watching the show now, it might feel like a really odd out-of-left-field move, but this is a series of episodes that take place decades in the future following some massive mutation incident where the entire planet was mutated and those who were not died. The episode follows Raph in his old age alongside a robotic Donatello who linked his brain up with a rebuilt Metalhead as they journey through the wasteland to fight and survive. So what happened here is that the creators of the show wanted to do this definitive ending for the series that would make it so the studio couldn't just artificially keep the show going or do some revival later on that would add on to the show that was made. So this was their idea to end the series. But I guess Nickelodeon didn't like that plan, so instead, they aired this intended final set of episodes in the middle of the season as a 3-part episode event and explicitly branded it as an alternate universe, thus making the episodes effectively non-canon to the actual series. To be honest, I prefer it this way, because I didn't really like these episodes that much anyway. Not to say that was because I thought it was bad or something, I just wasn't really my thing. I've never watched a Mad Max movie, so maybe I'd enjoy that, but episodes of Ninja Turtles where a lot of it is car chases in the desert with a lot of explosions and things like that, I just thought it was boring. Sean Astin does an excellent job leading the episode as the older Raph, though. His design kind of gave me some Night Watcher vibes from TMNT 2007. And as they met with the other turtles, I was very happy to see that Ice Cream Kitty survived all these years. That was the most important thing. Though I felt kind of stupid for not even realizing Leo was the villain chasing them until the very last second. But anyway, looking at this episode saga as though it were the canon ending, despite it closing on a somewhat optimistic note of the brothers finally back together again, the entire world getting destroyed in a mutagen apocalypse is kind of a downer state of affairs for the world, and it also comes out of nowhere if you watch the other episodes. So I'm more than glad to look at this as an alternate dimension, even removed from the fact that these were probably my least favorite episodes to watch. My second least favorite arc was the penultimate one. Like I said earlier, it was the Turtles traveling in time with Renette to battle classic movie monsters. Savanti's recruiting monsters for his army, including the Mummy, the Werewolf, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and so on. These are episodes with plenty of entertaining moments and good battles, like when Raph gets turned into a vampire at one point and it takes almost the whole arc to turn him back, but I still came out of this arc thinking, yeah, this is alright, because the Turtles seeing these monsters in the show paying homage to the Universal classics is nice, but that doesn't really do much for me as an episode. The Farmhouse arc also paid homage to a bunch of classic slasher movies, and the reason I didn't even dive into that is because I didn't notice because I haven't seen most of them. The figures in these episodes are so iconic that I obviously wouldn't even need to get it, but like I said, when the reference is the backing of the arc, I thought it was fine. It was a set of well-made episodes, but I didn't really think anything was mind-blowing or noteworthy here either. To close the show, you get a 3-episode arc where the 2012 Turtles team up with their 1987 counterparts again. It being 3 parts gives the story more room to breathe than it had in Season 4, where it was also connected to the Turtles in Space saga. Now that it is an arc dedicated to the crossover, we get to see the Technodrome, Shredder, Bebop and Rocksteady, and all that. To start, I have to give props. These episodes, with the limited time they spend in the 87 world, actually managed to really up their game from the previous seasons in terms of design. I thought the scenes from the 87 world just looked cheap. But these scenes now look pretty on model when comparing it to the designs from Season 1 of the original series, which I thought was impressive. All the original actors are back again, though James Avery, the original Shredder, had passed away in 2013, so for him, they got Kevin Michael Richardson to portray him, and I thought he was pretty funny as this Shredder. Making the villains of the classic series really bumbling idiots was a pretty good routine in that show, and I think that was captured here pretty well as they accidentally leave Bebop and Rocksteady behind and put an ad in the paper for a mutant rhino and warthog, and thus hire the Bebop and Rocksteady from the 2012 dimension. As for the Turtles, I was once again surprised by just how much of a gag they made these old Turtles, given how the team behind the 2012 show respected it while making their new one. But I think it's pretty funny if you just go along with it.
Wait! You can't kill us! This is a kid's show!
I mean, the whole idea that the classic Turtles suck at fighting is obviously not the intention behind the original series. Clunky animation in the show's later seasons are just a product of the time and the budget and all that stuff, and they're not using their weapons as just classic censorship. If you watch season 1 of the classic series, it was certainly not as goofy as they're portrayed here, but like I said, if you go along with it, the jokes actually got a really good laugh out of me.
But if I swing my sword at them, I could actually cut someone, and that would hurt. So what do you use that sword for? To slice pizza?
Duh! Are you guys even real ninjas?
It was also nice, as stated before, to see April, Casey, and Karai return to being main characters too. And it came with some surprises, like Bebop and Rocksteady decided to become good guys at the end. It was a really fun set of episodes, I thought. Though, with the final scene taking place in the 87 world, that does mean we don't get much of a goodbye for the 2012 heroes. To be fair, you could just say Carmageddon was supposed to be that, but like I said, I didn't really care for that much anyway. But the good news is, I think Season 4 still stands as a pretty good ending for the series, and thus, Season 5 didn't really need to give them a massive send-off, instead giving us more adventures in this world, which I suppose is what the title's trying to convey. That's pretty much all I have to say on Season 5. I thought it was 20 episodes of TV that were decent to good to great even, which is how I felt about the whole show. This season didn't really need to exist, I suppose, but for what it's worth, I thought it was a decent extension of the series. Something that I would say is above Fast Forward and definitely Back to the Sewer, if I'm honest. And I didn't even hate those seasons anyway. They had really good high points, but were kinda slogs to get through when they weren't hitting as high. But with us already in conclusion territory, that begs the question. TMNT 2003 versus 2012, which do I prefer? Well, that should be fairly obvious. The one I like more is the one I have seen every episode of multiple times. The 2003 TMNT is going to be one of those things I'll think of when pondering what shows have impacted me the most creatively, and the 2012 show will be a fun series I watched once and enjoyed my time with, but I don't have much to say about it besides that. But that's the thing. Before the 2012 show, from what I gather, the TMNT community was engaged in a years-long which cartoon is better war between the 87 and 03 series. Today, it seems like most people feel as though the 2003 and 2012 shows are the best TMNT shows, but there isn't a clear consensus on which one is better. My response to that is, I don't think there really needs to be one. I think there's more than enough room in this town for two really well done TMNT shows. I prefer the 2003 series for many reasons, and I think it just executes its ongoing story much better than the 2012 show did. For example, in the first 5 seasons, the 2003 series didn't have nearly the amount of drop plot lines that the 2012 show did. That show was so interconnected that episodes you thought had nothing to do with anything were a part of the world building of larger arcs. Take the way Notes from the Underground seemed like a filler arc, but became one of the major ongoing stories between the first 4 seasons. When the Turtles said they would come back and cure the mutants at the end of Notes Part 3, you'd think it would be like many cartoons where that just never happens, only for it to happen in Season 2. In the 2012 show, you'll have things like the Pulverizer being mutated and Don promising to find a cure for him, only for that to never happen. In fact, his being frozen in a glass jar is a background prop in Don's lab throughout the entire rest of the show. Not like I was really invested in that anyway, but I mean to say that the 2003 series executed long-running stories more precisely and concisely as well, which I have gone into earlier in the 2012 retrospective. But that doesn't mean the 2012 show doesn't get a ton of stuff right either. I mean, this is easily the most consistent TMNT show of the first 3 cartoons. I mean, there was no radical shift in tone, no wildly inconsistent animation, no art design upheaval, or any of the things that the first 2 cartoons were guilty of. Instead, this show told its story from start to finish, and the quality of the animation and action and storytelling just improved with time, and watching all these episodes over the course of a month, I just really respected the talent on display. It was a really solid show. Though with this series, I noticed the same thing I do with most TMNT shows. Obviously, the longer a cartoon runs on for, the less popular it will become by the end. I mean, if you were like 10 years old when the 2012 show came out, then you'd be 15 by the time it ended. You're probably just more interested in other stuff. 2012 Season 1 getting over 2 million in the ratings every episode, but most Season 5 episodes not even getting 1 million a lot of the time. This gives me the chance to add on to what I had said in my Back to the Sewer video in 2022. This seems to just be a Ninja Turtles thing. I said the Turtles don't have the staying power that Batman or Spider-Man have. People pointed out that all the TMNT shows have run longer than any show starring those two. But what I meant was, regardless of that, Batman or Spider-Man are just kind of always at a baseline of popularity that remains pretty consistent year by year. But then with the Turtles, this has happened 3 times, where they will explode in popularity with the new generation and then gradually decrease, and then the brand goes away for a bit and then it comes back swinging with the new generation. That was the arc of the brand in the late 80s into the early 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, and now we're on to the 4th generation of TMNT. And we'll see if it keeps going down the same path again. The Turtles are some of the most iconic characters of all time, and they will remain popular forever. What I'm just saying is that it always seems to go in generational cycles. I've always wondered why that was, and while watching season 5 of 2012, I thought perhaps it's because of the cross-genre appeal of TMNT. I mean, the show will always start as Ninja Turtles versus Foot Ninjas, but then by the end it's a show about space aliens and different dimensions and time travel and all that. People don't seem as interested in all that stuff, but it is simultaneously a TMNT staple in almost every incarnation. Although on that note, 2012 show also had to deal with Nickelodeon getting sporadic in the air dates with the last 2 seasons. Sometimes there'd be months between episodes, and other times there'd be multiple episodes dropping back to back. Lack of consistency doesn't help things. But regardless of all that, I think the 2012 Turtles deserve to be remembered quite fondly. If you think about it, this era of TMNT had quite a large impact on the brand. This was the first cartoon made after the Viacom buyout in 2009, so it was the first Nickelodeon Turtles, the company that has continued owning the TMNT ever since. And in this time period, the brand expanded beyond what it ever was before. The 2012 Turtles were the first ones to cross over with Batman in the comics, for example, which I think set the stage for the TMNT to be so popular in crossover media to this day. Like that comic being adapted as the Batman vs. TMNT film, the Turtles appearing in the Injustice games, and now Fortnite. A major stride made for the IP that first happened during the 2012 Turtles era. And it was a show that you can tell the cast and crew were super passionate about, and it even gave us the chance to hear Rob Paulsen get a second round of voicing a Ninja Turtle, and he absolutely crushed it both times. This was also a series that got the 1987 TMNT cast reunited for multiple crossover episodes, and it introduced new staples to the franchise like April being the same age as the Turtles, a major change that has stuck ever since. A lot of great things went into this show, and a lot of great things came as a result of it, is what I mean to say. What I do find interesting to look back on is how I feel like today the 2012 Turtles are in a similar position that the 2003 Turtles were during the 2012 era. If you recall my 2003 retrospective, I had said that during the 2010s, and even when I made those videos, that I felt like the Turtles I liked, which used to dominate the brand, were treated as though they didn't exist anymore, as TMNT became one of those brands where it was either a celebration of its nostalgic roots or a showcase of new things. But that period between was largely forgotten. I feel like the 2012 Turtles are in that position now, which is why I highlighted how big this era of TMNT actually was just a moment ago. Since if this is anything like the 2000s Turtles, I'm sure the nostalgia for the 2012 era will eventually come around. It was kind of funny. My 2003 retrospective was all about the Turtles era that pop culture doesn't talk about anymore, only for 2023 to be the year that we get the 2003 series complete on DVD, Playmates including 2003 figure reissues as part of their Classics collection, and Super 7 announcing they're doing collector's figures based on the 2003 series next. Exactly what I predicted in the Turtles Forever video. Now, I'm not gonna say I brought the 2003 series back to life. No, I'm not as arrogant as that. But I'm not gonna say that I didn't either. But anyway, I'm getting off subject. My point is, now that we're in this 4th era of TMNT where the nostalgia has now extended to include the 2000s, it seems like 2010 stuff is being celebrated less. But I'm confident in the fact that these Turtles will be seen again someday, which I think is a nice optimistic note to end the video series on. Like I said at the beginning, I had no idea how this is going to turn out at the start because I had no extensive history with this show before making these videos, but I think I found a groove with it after the first few. I think this was still fun while not being anything like the 2000s retrospective I did. I enjoyed doing it, and I hope the audience enjoyed watching it, even if it wasn't as grand as that 2000s retrospective. But with that said, this is the last video for 2023. I hope the longtime subs are looking forward to what's coming in the new year, because I think there's a lot to be excited for if you're a longtime subscriber. But I think that's enough for today, so to close, I'll just say what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.